This is Becoming Inclusive from the Kaleidoscope Group, where we're thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion for more empowered people at work. We're committed to real change, and that begins with real conversations. Welcome in.
Hi, I'm Reggie Ponder, and welcome to another episode of Becoming Inclusive. I have my co-host here, Catherine Potts. Hey, Kat, how are you?
Hey, happy to be here.
And we have with us one of my favorites, just for a number of reasons, and that is Mitch Brown. Mitch Brown joins us again. Hey, Mitch, thanks so much for joining us.
Reg, it's a pleasure every single time.
and Mitch, when I say one of my favorites, people be like, does he say that for every episode? No, I do not. I don't say that for every episode.
I don't know, Reg.
I don't say one of my favorites.
But Reggie, it's okay if you do say it for every episode. The truth of the matter is, this is when you really mean it. And that's okay. If you got to use me to make others feel included and feel good, I'm about that. I work in D&I. It's okay with me.
I love that. Becoming inclusive. Thank you so much, Mitch. I really love that. This time we have so many conversations offline, and that actually informs why we come together sometimes or what we talk about. And in this one, coming up is Juneteenth. And that is, we're right in the month of June. Juneteenth is right here. And we all talked about this. There are people saying, oh no, seriously? Another holiday? Why is that important? Why do I need to know about that? Does it impact anything in my workplace? And I thought that it would be a great opportunity to talk about this. And Mitch, I would like for you kind of kick it off for us, because I know you have some thoughts around this.
Well, first and foremost, again, thank you all for having me. Kat, it's always a pleasure to, talk to you as well.
Thanks,
listen.
Because you said you were happy to see Reggie and you left me out. So,
and I noticed that, and here I am, right? I'm willing to acknowledge, retract, and go forward. So that's what we're going to do. But anyhow, listen, that question that, Reggie, you started us off with is like, hey, another holiday. First of all, listen, there are lots of holidays. Holidays are great things. Holidays are our opportunity to observe things that are important to us from many different perspectives, cultural, historical, so on and so on. Juneteenth specifically is an observation and a holiday that is looking to do a lot of different things, I think, for not just African Americans, but for everyone. And it's one of those things where I think, when you think about Juneteenth historically, it's been what I would call a overshadowed holiday, maybe a holiday that hasn't necessarily been widely celebrated outside of the Black community. But you know what set us in this, in the course that we're headed now, Reggie, was 2 years ago. The murder of Mr. Floyd had, so much. It was a pivotal point in American history. I think I'm willing to say that, even 2 years after the fact. And 1 month, not even 1 month after that happened, I think over Memorial Day in 2020, there was a lot of emphasis on racial equity. There was a lot of emphasis on, what can we do? And it just so happened that Juneteenth was that next holiday that a lot of people could rally around and get behind that. So when you ask, why should I care about it? Listen, I'm not here to tell people which holidays that they need to observe or they need to care about. But I can make the case that Juneteenth is something that is looking to, rally us as Americans, celebrate, who we are as, in terms of historically who we are as African Americans and, our historical legacy in this country. And that is in the context, right? Because we've talked about equity in other conversations of thinking about, well, prior to now, that's been something that's been missing, or that's been something that's been overlooked, as I said. And it is really that opportunity that a lot of people are taking to grasp that. I mean, what can you look at now to say, hey, here's evidence of that? It's officially a federal holiday now, and that's something that has came about here in legislation since, again, the last 2 years. As you probably want to talk about here today, Reggie, a lot of companies are observing this, giving their employees either the time off or the option to take time off, and also putting programming around Juneteenth. So
I want to stop there.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of stop there because the cat is probably going to jump in, is that we started off this conversation talking about Juneteenth, but there's still a lot of people who are like, what is that? So,
right.
So either one of you guys can kind of set the basis for why Juneteenth is important, just in terms of American history.
Mitch, you can, and then I'll hop in because I have some notes around just like workplace stuff. So all you, Mitch.
So let's talk about what is Juneteenth. So on or about June 19th, this is why we celebrate around that day, right? Every year, June 19th, 1865. This is about 2 months after the Confederacy surrendered. And, slavery at that point effectively was ended in the United States. However, I mean, as you can imagine, in 1865, word doesn't travel as fast as it does here in 2022. Not everybody knew that, right? So there are many parts across the country where people were still operating under, enslavement in bondage. And it represents the date that Gordon Granger, who was a Union general, arrived in Galveston, Texas, to inform enslaved African Americans of their freedom and that the Civil War had actually ended. General Granger's announcement put into effect the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been issued again more than 2.5 years before then by President Abraham Lincoln. So what it does is it signifies that moment where, again, even though the laws had changed, the war had been won, in terms of for the Union. It signifies, that actual day, of independence, of the technical severance from, slavery and endorsed slavery, right, in this country. So that's what we celebrate, right? So again, and it's Kat, you jump in here, but one of the things that I think contextually is important for people to understand is that it is, that moment that, yes, we have, celebrate this as like, hey, we are, the word reached so it need to reach. But this is even in the backdrop of like, July 4th. And we can think about things like Frederick Douglass's famous speech, to what is, July 4th to a slave, right?
Yeah.
But go ahead, Kat, jump in.
No, there's that relationship there that I think sometimes people sort of miss. So like, why should it matter? We celebrate July 4th. Well, July 4th didn't necessarily include the African Americans here, right? And so that's why it's like, how do we highlight that and not just that day alone, because there's a bunch of individuals who are not represented in that celebration. And I think it's really easy to overlook that if you don't really understand why Juneteenth is so important. What's the history behind it? It's very easy. And so I think you did a great job, explaining that, because I've gotten people have asked me like, but we have July 4th. What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, we're all good. We're all free. And it's like, no, actually, you may have been, but I can't share that level of celebration if we're really going to get down to who that benefited.
And one of the things that I want to add is that it also signals what has happened to the African American community. I know, Mitch, you talked about this issue of equity, is that this whole thing about justice delayed, because it was delayed, that these group of slaves could have been freed a long time ago, but they were still working under bondage. And that whole concept of justice delayed, of equity, is one of the issues that has plagued this country as it relates to many of the ethnic minorities in this country.
And we're also talking about wanting to feel seen, right? If you think about, obviously, the huge impact that slavery had on this country, it's one of the most pivotal things that the country went through. So you can't really say why another holiday when you're talking about Juneteenth, right?
Well, my thought is that Juneteenth is it's much more about American history,
Right.
than it is about African American history.
Yep.
Because only do we, when we think about quote unquote American history, when it comes to something that is, again, about people who have made contributions to this country and to this country's legacy that are, different from the dominant or normative race culture at the time, that we have to, try to massage it into thinking about, it's African American history, or it's Asian American history, or it's this, and it's for this group. We never or rarely ever talk about, because George Washington did this, or Ben Franklin did this, that is for that group. So I think that is part of the work to be done, if you will, Reggie. Back to why is this important today? Because I think it should be served up as American history. And when you talk about, justice delayed, I mean, listen, that's one of to me, one of the interesting things about Juneteenth is that in many ways, when you have something like Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, as it is also is known, from that point forward, right, you see something different. You can embrace something different. But to be honest, it really signals for, and this is why I think it's important to have these kind of conversations. African American, the African American experience in this country, or again, the American experience of folks who came here enslaved in bondage, right? After the Emancipation Proclamation, there's so much more, after that, right? To when you talk about delayed, gratification, or, trying to aspire to be something, to reach something, or the ideals of what the Emancipation Proclamation stood for. I mean, that's what makes this story unique. That's what makes Juneteenth important, to me, at least. But go ahead, Reggie.
Well, no, you think I don't see I saw what you did there, Mitch. Our podcast is called Becoming Inclusive, and you became inclusive with talking about Juneteenth. You said that this is not an African American holiday or solely an African American thing, that it is an American thing. And that is so true. It is so true. And it invites others to not only celebrate, but to learn about it. And one of the things that
and promotes unity as well. I think that's important.
And I want you to talk about that. Speak more about that, Kat, when you say it promotes unity.
It does promote unity to, Mitch's point, where it's not just for African Americans, it's for all of us to come together and learn together and give people space and opportunity to do that. There's not every day where you're able to do that, or you're in a situation where you can do that, or an environment, right? So here's this day where it's not just for African Americans, it's for us all to be able to learn about our history as Americans, right?
Yeah, but I think to be honest, I think that's part of the challenge. Right. I think that, when we talk about, Reggie, how Juneteenth is observed in the marketplace, right, with some of the clients we work with, and maybe in other, institutions like academia and otherwise, it presents a challenge, because I think if you don't know the story, right, and if you don't do a good job of, really painting the narrative of just what Kat talked about, that this is American history, it could be challenging for some folks to embrace. It can feel like, again, this seems like an African American holiday. What about me, or what about us, or why do I have to listen to this, right? And I think that is, to me, when we get our calls, and I'm talking to clients about, hey, we want to do something for Juneteenth, but what's the best way to approach it? Because that's just an honest kind of thing of where we are. And again, remember, Reggie, off the heels of Mr. Floyd in 2020, we didn't need to have those kind of conversations. People were begging for them. And what I see and foresee going into the future is that if we're going to sustain this interest and and really capitalize on what Congress did in 2021, and Joe Biden signed into a federal holiday. It's going to take that effort to continuously have these conversations, to continuously think creatively about how we do enlighten people to that. Because again, I don't think it's something that comes natural. And we, quite frankly, again, I'm interested with what you think about this too, Reggie. It's not just also a Black thing in terms of like some Black people, listen, to be honest with you, don't know everything that there is to know about Juneteenth. So it's also one of the things where we're not hoarding the knowledge and saying, hey, we're going to bless you with all this. It's an opportunity for all of us to really be enriched.
Yeah, I love that, Mitch, and I always love your thinking with that. When I look at Juneteenth, what I see is that this was the time in which the country was trying to become inclusive, and that means when we talk about American history, that is real important, because we don't want to talk about generally when we look in our history books and look and see what students are learning in the schools. We don't talk a lot about slavery. I've even seen ways where they refer to slavery, the slaves, as migrants or immigrants, that they came over. They were forced to come over here. But this whole issue, which that would be kind of getting us off subject a little bit. But this whole issue of a country trying to become inclusive is really important and very instructive as to where, even today, as to where we need to move. That's how I look at that, Mitch.
But I wonder too, though, in a workplace setting, how do we mitigate to something you brought up, Mitch, the what about me factor?
Well, that goes back. That's bigger than a Juneteenth issue.
Yeah.
If you need to be asking about your overall D&I strategy and your programming. Listen, a lot of clients might make a calendar. These are the things we're going to observe and talk about. But one of the things that you should do, right? It's a very relative question. What the answer is for, Katz Corporation is going to be different from, Reggie's juke joint. The constituents, the stakeholders are the people who determine what your, curriculum or what your agenda is going to be. If you have folks there that are interested in observing so-and-so, right, we'll look into that, right? And if there's some kind of gap, right, when it's something you're not covering, create instruments to be able to tap into your stakeholders and your constituents to ask, well, what else are we missing? I think that is the approach more so than it is like, hey, let me, for lack of better words, attack the Juneteenth, committee and programming and say, well, what about me? Like the interest of inclusion is never to do something in spite of somebody else, right? Stop there, Mitch.
Yeah. Stop there. Say that again. Say that again, man.
Say that again.
Say it one more time for the people in the back.
Reggie liked that one. He got about a juke joint for that one. So Reggie said, the interest of inclusion is never despite, I think I said that right. Inclusion is not, the interest of inclusion is never, to spite someone else. Hopefully I said, I don't know if I said it right.
You got it. You're good.
Okay, cool. But, it's not a, what about me, not me. It's, okay, well, let's learn about it. I think if you have an authentic interest, Kat, that people will take this opportunity and say, hey, it was a great experience. How do we create an experience like this for X, Y, and Z, right? I think that's what it's about.
Being able to pass it forward, it creates opportunity to do that for other people, for other holidays and other things that maybe we're not currently celebrating that should be celebrated.
Yeah, and you mentioned unity earlier, and it's like, hey, once you buy in and, again, are doing things to increase your cultural competence in an environment, that begets more interest in increasing your cultural competence, in my experience.
Across the board. So I know you're saying that, but I just want to punctuate this point is that it does it across the board, because now I'm not upset when the Native Americans say, hey, you know what? We need to observe this. I'm not upset when we start talking about unity, we're looking at the fact that we're saying, okay, everyone has a story to tell, and we shouldn't be mad at people telling their story. In fact, we should embrace other people telling their story. What we find, though, is that a lot of times people are asking that question, like, not only what about me, but why do I have to do that? Why do I have to learn about that? And I think, Mitch, in a prior podcast, you talked about this whole issue of unity, how when you care about everybody's needs, then your needs also, when the other people will hopefully start to care about your needs as well.
There is some reciprocity here. It's the law of attraction in some ways, right? All these kind of good energy things in the universe, we repackage them and talk about them in different ways. But you know what? When you, as they say, when you show love, you get love. And that's real on par for most part. And that if you are a person who is about others will, and again, this is not an absolute rule. Yeah, there are going to be outliers. But we're talking about on par, on average, because we're talking about cultural transformation. We're talking about changing organizations, changing companies, right? So I'm not worried about outliers here. I'm worried about the mass, right? And I think if you operate in that way, Reggie, that is what unity is all about. That moves us forward. So that's why. And to be quite frank and honest, if you are, again, this is considering that you are subscribing to inclusive environments and being an inclusive person. If you're signing your name on the dotted line for that, if your CEO is signing up for that, being able to be more proximate with the experience of others really does help you do a lot of things in the interest of inclusion. Wow, I could be more empathetic, Reg. I could recognize people in ways that, makes them feel valued, right?
That brings more value into the workplace, and in turn, you get a better output.
We hear this all the time, and so I want to push both of you guys on this. We hear this thing about how being more inclusive creates better outcomes, and I think sometimes it kind of falls on deaf ears. So, Mitch, you're out in the marketplace. Explain that to me. Break that down to me when we say that.
In layman's terms, because I don't want to get too. Here's the best way I can put it. When you feel a way about your environment and the people who constitute or that environment, that has an impact on you. So when we talk about inclusiveness and inclusion and making inclusive environments and all of these different soft skills and things that we talk about on this podcast and in other mediums and modalities, those are the things that operate in the interest of that. If I go somewhere, Reggie, and, I walk into Reggie's juke joint, and the first thing that happens when I walk in there, somebody walks over and greets me and smiles and says, "Hey, how can I help you?" People bring me my food. And they bring it to me real fast and, hot and, and check on me and do those things.
That's my spot.
It's the juke joint now. That's the juke joint. And, and because the juke joint has taken an interest in me, they know what I like to hear, right? So they got the R&B tunes playing, right? They might be playing some Tim's or some Bryson Tiller or something, And Reggie, if we want to get a little old school, we can play a little Whitney Houston or some Luther.
What about me? I'm not that much younger. I listen to Whitney Houston too.
Okay, I appreciate. I was really saying that for Reggie, just in case he didn't know who Tim.
I feel excluded.
I really appreciate that. But what you're bringing to the table.
My point is, wait. But my point is, you do things right, and because I feel included, I feel welcome, I feel a sense of belonging. I'm going to keep coming back to Reggie's juke joint. Again, we talk about these things conceptually, but they're core business practices that we do with our consumers, So why don't you do them with your employees?
Yeah.
Or why don't you do them with your peers, right? So I mean, I'm just saying, like, that's what we mean by inclusiveness is of a business interest, right? That's a great layman kind of anecdotal way to kind of explain that.
But even at an elementary level, very elementary, it's when someone's in a good mood, they're smiling, they're going to hold the door for people, they're very obviously engaging, right? When someone's in a bad mood, typically it's very visible, they're not engaging, they probably aren't being very nice to people. I feel like it's that basic.
Yeah, so I hear you, Kat, but I want to say that, moods kind of fluctuate, but culture doesn't. So if the culture is a certain way, the way you come to work is not really your mood; it's your environment. You
yes,
feel,
but your environment does impact your mood.
You feel, but what I mean by that is that you really feel that every day that you go into to the office place. And what it does for me, I know I've worked for what I want to say great companies, and I work for companies that weren't so great. And the companies that I want to say that were great, I would use my discretionary time to do the job. But the companies that I felt that weren't so great, they would not get my discretionary time. They wouldn't get the extra push from me because I didn't feel what Mitch is talking about in terms of that warm and welcoming environment. And so that's how it comes down for me. I'm not saying mood is not it, but that whole culture, though, creates a climate
that's what gets intimidating, I think, sometimes for business owners is, okay, now I have to create this environment, right? That's what can be intimidating, this calming, nice, everybody, that I think is where people sometimes get a little bit intimidated. And I think it needs to happen. I co-sign on that, but I do think that's where there's some pushback too. Because what you're talking about does take a lot of effort.
I see you doing this, Mitch, so jump on in.
I mean, I wasn't doing that because I wanted to jump in. I was just really, my head just itched. So yeah, it'd be like that sometimes, Reggie. When you got hair up there, Reggie.
Right.
I don't know if it itches otherwise. But no. And look, we're kidding around. I lost my train of thought here, right? Real podcast stuff right here. So what, Kat? What did you say?
Basically, what I was saying is the environment that Reggie is describing is sometimes what can get pushed back because it does take effort to create that type of environment and then sustain that type of environment. You said earlier, Reggie, some CEOs are like, oh gosh, now I got to worry about feelings. I got to worry about being inclusive. And the environment you're describing, Reggie, although you're describing it very well, that in itself can seem very daunting.
It was not. It's very timely comment, by the way. I had a discussion about this earlier today with a prospective of a client, and you're right. I think a lot of leadership teams, executives, CEOs, they struggle with how to show up in this space, and I'm talking D&I in general. Are we going to be somebody who is all the way there, right? And by the way, the reason why you might not want to show up as all the way there, because maybe, when you're all the way out there, sometimes people take that and they define you beyond means by which you define yourself. Oh, this is like a super liberal company, or like, hey, they do all this or they do this, and that doesn't agree with who I am, whatever, right? So you might lose clients, you might lose employees. There's some risks that when you say daunting, I think that's what they're considering. And then is, on the other side of that spectrum is how we do nothing, right? And we seem like we're a dinosaur, like we're a fossil, like we're not moving with the times. And I think when you talk about Juneteenth, that's part of that same struggle, which is how do we show up with this where we're observing and we're with the times, like, hey, yeah, we saw Mr. Floyd in the peripheral. We didn't like it. We made a stance on that. We said something as an organization, as a company, because we saw our employees hurting. We saw the world hurting. But, maybe we felt comfortable doing it in 2020, and maybe we don't know, when Reggie talks about culture, right? You're right. There is a sustaining thing. Again, there's that word again. And that's going to require a little bit more of us. And again, we've had conversations about that, about executive commitment and those kind of things. But I'll say that is what people are dealing with. I agree. And I think some people deal with it better than others.
And so we're rounding out on time. But Kat, I think you might have had some other corporate impacts, or no? Did you have some other things from a corporate perspective that might you might want to add?
No, I think we actually went over them. It's just, how do you make people feel seen in the workplace, and how do you approach that so that people feel included and feel represented? And this is an opportunity. Juneteenth is seriously a huge opportunity to be able to do that, which I think can pave the way for other holidays to come that aren't being celebrated.
Yeah, you listen to them. You tap in, you assess, you create environments where people feel welcome. And to be quite frank with you, Juneteenth is one of those environments. You got to say to yourself, though, I think in this assessment, again, of where people want to be, they may think that, creating space for Juneteenth may alienate folks, right? But again, I think that's where you have to do a good job of, recognizing that Juneteenth is American history. It's about unifying people. If they don't have that narrative, they don't know that, then, you need to get that out there. If people don't agree with it, that's one thing. But I think, again, what you're working with is, I think the majority of people, when we talk about receptivity to D&I, or in that, if you're bell curve it, I've said this many times in other forums, majority of people in that middle ground just want that practical application. They want to know, they want to understand. They're not necessarily active resistors to what you're doing, but they want to know, they want to be clearly informed, because, that's what you got to do. Right. And that's to me, part of the work that's important here. And there's no one way. Right. So as we talk about Juneteenth, if you came here to say, OK, well, this is what we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. Right. I could give you that, but you got to call us and hire us to pay for that. But in general, I don't think there's not one way. There's not a wrong way to do this. But those are some of the things you got to consider that we talked about that I just recapped, because, otherwise, right, it's going to be a struggle to not only observe Juneteenth, but like we talked about, Kat, it's going to be a struggle to, again, do anything that you want to do with regards to, holidays and observing some of these things. But, again, it's a rich thing. And the last thing I'll say here, because we did talk about this, but I don't know if we hit on it. Juneteenth, much like, let me give you another analogy. I love these analogies, Reggie. So one might say, you ever heard, so I listen to a lot of hip hop, right? And, Reggie, people might make a song, right? And somebody would say, hey, I made this song for my neighborhood, right? For my boys in my neighborhood. And by golly, Reggie, the song takes off and it ends up on the billboard or something. So just because, again, you feel like something's catered to somebody doesn't mean other people don't have appreciation for it. Doesn't mean people can't seek to understand that culture and embrace that culture.
I love it. I love it because you're making me think I'm going back to Cali. You're making me think about the Bronx and New York. I mean, you making me think
interpretation varies.
That you're absolutely right. That there's so many ways in which something that might be specific has general and greater application. Man, look, that is Catherine Potts.
Hey.
That is Mitch Brown. We talked today about Juneteenth, and I think the takeaway that I want to put out there is that it's an important moment in American history, and however you observe it, I don't want to say celebrate, however you observe it may be different through corporations, as individuals, and organizations. But it is an important American moment. So with that, again, I'm Reggie Ponder. This is Becoming Inclusive, and we will see you folks next time.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Becoming Inclusive is presented by the Kaleidoscope Group, your full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion partner serving clients worldwide. Learn more and continue the conversation at kgdiversity.com.